Zulenga was a city full of life, a place where dreams were built under the bright African sun. Tall buildings touched the sky, while busy streets bustled with people chasing success. Vendors lined the sidewalks, selling colorful fabrics, sizzling street food, and handcrafted jewelry. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter, car horns, and the distant beat of drums from a local festival. But beneath the energy and excitement, Zulenga had a darker side. Behind closed doors, hidden from the eyes of the world, some homes held painful secrets. Secrets that no one talked about. In a city where people thrived, some suffered in silence. And in one of those homes, a woman named Nia Maduka was living a nightmare. One she feared would never end, but fate had a different plan. Eze Maduka was the kind of man people envied. He had everything: wealth, power, and respect. When he walked through the streets of Zulenga, people greeted him with admiration. Businessmen shook his hand, eager to work with him. He had built his empire from the ground up, earning a reputation as a man who never lost. His sharp mind and ruthless tactics had made him one of the most successful men in the city. If you saw him at a social event, you'd think he was the perfect gentleman, polite, charming, generous. But the Eze Maduka the world saw was just a mask. The real Eze was someone else, entirely. At home, behind the locked doors of his grand mansion, he was not the kind, successful man people thought he was. He was a man who controlled everything, especially his wife, Nia, and for years, she had lived in the shadow of his rage, trapped in a life that felt more like a prison than a marriage. Nia had once been a woman full of dreams. Before she became Mrs. Maduka, she had been known for her bright smile and kind heart. She had wanted to start her own business, travel the world, make a name for herself. When she met Ez, she had believed she had found the man who would support her dreams, who would walk beside her as an equal. He had been so charming in the beginning, bringing her flowers, calling her his queen, promising her a beautiful future. But the fairy tale ended soon after their wedding. The first time he hit her, she couldn't believe it. It had been over something small, something as simple as a dinner being slightly cold. One moment he was speaking to her, and the next, his hand had struck her face so hard she had fallen to the floor. She had looked up at him in shock, waiting for an apology, waiting for him to say it was an accident, and he had apologized, so sweetly, so sincerely. He had held her, kissed her forehead, and whispered that it would never happen again. She had believed him, but it did happen again, and again. The apologies became shorter, then they stopped completely. What remained was the fear. At first, Nia tried to fight back. She told him she would leave, but Eze laughed. "Where will you go?" he had asked, his voice calm, almost amused. "You are my wife. You belong to me." He had taken her phone, cut her off from friends, controlled her every move. If she cried, he ignored it. If she screamed, he made sure no one could hear. In Zulenga, people admired Eze and Nia as the perfect couple. No one saw the truth. No one saw the bruises she hid under long sleeves and layers of makeup. No one saw how she flinched when he moved too fast, or how she kept her eyes down when they were in public. Even when someone suspected something, they said nothing, because speaking against Eze Maduka was dangerous. Her family knew, but instead of helping her, they told her to be patient. "Marriage is hard," her mother had said. "A good wife stays by her husband's side." Even the neighbors, the ones who sometimes heard the muffled cries or the sound of glass breaking in the middle of the night, stayed silent. And so Nia stayed, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. Every night, when Eze fell asleep beside her, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She wondered what her life could have been if she had never married him. She wondered if there was a way out, if she could ever be free. She prayed for a miracle. She didn't know that fate had already started moving. Late at night, when the streets of Zulenga were quiet, muffled screams sometimes echoed from the Maduka mansion. Neighbors would pause for a moment, listening, their hearts heavy with unease. But then they would shake their heads and turn away, closing their windows, locking their doors. It wasn't their place to interfere. Everyone in Zulenga knew that Eze Maduka was not a man to cross. He was powerful, well-connected, and ruthless. Speaking against him was dangerous. The people who worked with him, who dined with him at expensive restaurants, all knew that behind his charming smile was a man who could destroy anyone who stood in his way. So they stayed silent. The screams would fade, the night would pass, and by morning, Nia would be seen walking beside her husband, her head slightly lowered, her smile practiced, but empty. Her family knew what was happening. When she visited them, they saw the way she moved carefully, the way her hands trembled when she poured tea. They noticed the bruises she tried to cover, the weight she had lost, the sadness in her once bright eyes. But instead of helping her, they told her to be strong. They told her that a woman's duty was to endure, that marriage was never easy. A wife must be patient, her mother had whispered, pressing Nia's hands between her own. Men have their tempers. You must not shame your family by leaving him. Shame. That was all they cared about. Not her pain, not her fear, only their pride, their reputation. To them, leaving a husband, even an abusive one, was worse than being trapped in a life of suffering. She had tried once to reach out to the police. She had waited until Ez was away on a business trip, her hands shaking as she dialed the number. When she told them what was happening, there was a long pause, and then the officer sighed. "Mrs. Maduka," he said slowly, "your husband is a very respected man. Do you have proof?" Proof? She had bruises, broken ribs, nightmares that never ended. But proof. "Number, you should try to talk to him," the officer continued. "Sort this out privately. These things happen in marriages. These things happen." That was when Nia realized no one was coming to save her. Not her family, not the neighbors, not even the law. She was alone. At night she lay in bed beside the man who had become her worst nightmare, her body aching, her heart heavy. She listened to his steady breathing, wishing she had the courage to run, but knowing there was nowhere to go. So she prayed. Every single night. She prayed for a way out. She prayed for justice. She prayed for something, anything, to change. And one night, fate finally answered. The heavy wooden door of the Maduka mansion trembled under the force of the pounding. It wasn't the hesitant knock of a visitor. It wasn't the polite tap of a neighbor. It was something else. Louder, heavier, demanding. It echoed through the grand hallways, vibrating through the walls like a force greater than any man. Nia's breath caught in her throat as she stared at Ise. His rage, which had burned so brightly just moments ago, flickered. His hand, which had been raised to strike her, slowly lowered. Something about that knock unsettled him. His nostrils flared as he turned sharply toward the door, his fists still clenched. Boom, boom, boom. Again, louder, more forceful. For the first time in her life, Nia saw hesitation in Ise's eyes. It was brief, just a flicker, but it was there. His shoulders, usually squared with confidence, stiffened. His lips pressed into a thin line. Whoever was on the other side of that door, he hadn't been expecting them. He took slow, measured steps forward, his bare feet barely making a sound against the polished floor. Nia didn't dare move. She wasn't sure if she was more afraid of what would happen to her if he turned back around, or of what was waiting on the other side of that door. As he grabbed the handle and yanked the door open, the air in the room changed. It was subtle at first, like the shift in the wind before a storm. Then it grew heavier, thick, with something unseen yet powerful. Nia couldn't see who stood outside, but she could see Ise's reaction. His breath hitched. Just for a second, his fingers twitched. His body, always so tense with control, seemed to shrink. And then a voice cut through the silence. "Eza Maduka." The voice was deep, steady, carrying a weight that sent chills down Nia's spine. It was calm, yet unshakable, like a mountain that had stood for centuries, unbothered by the storms around it. "The ancestors are watching." Nia's pulse pounded in her ears. She had heard that phrase before. It was something the elders said when justice was coming, when wrongs that had been ignored for too long were finally about to be made right. Eze swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing slightly. He was a man who feared nothing, a man who commanded respect, who bent the world to his will. And yet, as he stood there, facing whoever had come for him, Nia saw something she had never seen before. Fear. Pure, unmistakable fear. A gust of wind swept into the house, rustling the curtains, carrying with it the faint scent of burning wood and rain. And in that moment, Nia knew. This night would not end the way Eze had planned. Fate had arrived. Eze's footsteps echoed through the marble-floored hallway, each step heavier than the last. His mind burned with fury. The failed business deal haunted him, swirling in his head, taunting him. He wasn't a man who lost. He wasn't a man who let anyone disrespect him. Not his business rivals, not his employees, and certainly not his wife. Nia had dared to speak tonight, dared to meet his eyes when he came home in a rage. And for that, she would pay. The knock came again, loud, unrelenting. It wasn't polite or uncertain. It was powerful, deliberate, like whoever stood behind the door wasn't asking to come in. They were demanding to be heard. As his face twisted with irritation, his body, still vibrating with unspent anger, moved faster. He reached the door and yanked it open, ready to tear into whoever dared interrupt him. But when he saw the figure standing outside, the words died in his throat. The man was tall, taller than Ease, and draped in a heavy dark cloak that seemed to move with the wind, though the night air was completely still. His skin was deep, rich ebony, and his face was strong, weathered, like he had seen things that no man should see. His eyes, though, they were the most unsettling, piercing, sharp, and unnervingly steady. They glowed faintly, as though lit from within by an ember that refused to die. For a moment, Ezzy felt his stomach tighten, though he didn't understand why. He wasn't a man who got intimidated, and yet the stranger's gaze seemed to hold him in place, stripping him bare without a single word. The man didn't speak immediately. He just stared, his face unreadable, his presence impossible to ignore. The world seemed unnaturally quiet, like everything around them was holding its breath. Then, the man spoke. The ancestors are watching, Eze Maduka. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was deep and steady, carrying a weight that pressed into the air around them. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a sentence. If you strike her tonight, your fate will be sealed before the next full moon. Nia's breath caught in her throat. She could barely see the man from where she stood, but his voice wrapped around her like a shield. The words echoed in her bones. It wasn't just a statement. It felt like truth. For the first time in years, Eze didn't know what to say. His mouth opened, then shut again. His brain screamed at him to lash out, to yell, to assert his dominance, but the weight of the man's words clung to him, wrapping around his chest like invisible chains. A flicker of something unfamiliar crept into Ease's eyes. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was smaller, quieter, fear. But fear was a weakness, and Easy didn't tolerate weakness. He shoved it down, burying it beneath his pride. His face twisted into a cruel sneer, and he barked out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Get off my property," Ease snarled. "You think you can scare me with stories of spirits and ancestors? I am Eze Maduka. I answer to no one. Not you, not your so-called ancestors. No one." The man didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't even seem to breathe. He only stared, his eyes locked onto Easy's with a calm, unshakable certainty. Easy's sneer faltered, just for a second. His throat felt dry. His hands trembled, barely noticeable, but enough that it made his chest tighten even more. The stranger tilted his head slightly, his voice quiet but firm. "The ancestors always collect what they are owed." Easy's skin prickled. He didn't understand why those words unsettled him so much. It was just a stupid superstition, an old wives' tale. He didn't believe in that nonsense. With a growl, he grabbed the door and slammed it shut. The sound echoed through the house like thunder. For a moment, the hallway was deathly silent. Ezzy stood there, breathing hard, his hand still gripping the door handle. His heart thudded against his ribcage. He told himself it was from anger, not fear, not from the man's words. "If you strike her tonight, your fate will be sealed before the next full moon." The sentence clawed at his mind, circling like a vulture. He shook his head, scoffing to himself. "Crazy old fool," he muttered under his breath. But his voice didn't sound convincing, not even to him. Something deep inside him, something primal, told him the man wasn't crazy, and that scared him more than he'd ever admit. His anger, which had burned so fiercely minutes ago, flickered. It wasn't gone, but it wasn't in control anymore. The rage that had been destined for Nia didn't come back. His hand twitched by his side, but he didn't raise it. He didn't even turn to look at her. Without a word, Ez turned away and walked toward his study, slamming that door behind him too. Nia stood in the middle of the room, frozen, tears pooling in her eyes. Her body still trembled, but her heart felt different, lighter. She didn't know who the man was, or where he had come from. She didn't know if he was a man at all, or something more. But she knew one thing for certain. He had saved her life tonight, and somewhere deep in her soul, a spark of something she hadn't felt in years flickered back to life. The morning after the stranger came, Ezzy woke up with a heavy head and a heavier heart. His sleep had been broken, not by dreams, but by the weight of the man's words echoing in his mind. "The ancestors are watching. If you strike her tonight, your fate will be sealed before the next full moon." He pushed the voice away, convincing himself it was nonsense. He was Ezi Maduka, powerful, respected, feared. No street beggar with a spooky voice could change that. But as he stepped outside, something felt wrong. The air itself felt heavier. The sounds of Zulenga seemed distant and muffled, like the city was watching him from behind a veil. The people looked different too. Normally the streets were alive with vendors calling his name, offering him the best of their goods. Taxi drivers fought for his attention, hoping to drive the great Eze Maduka. Today, they turned away. The fruit vendor who used to greet him with a smile suddenly found something very interesting on the ground. The taxi drivers drove past without even slowing down. The guards at his office, men who once stood straighter at the sight of him, avoided his eyes. His stomach tightened. Eze brushed it off as coincidence. Maybe they were just having a bad day. He walked faster, head held high, but the stares followed him, not with admiration this time, but with something else. Fear, disgust, pity. By the time he reached his office, his phone was already ringing. His assistant, Amara, sounded frantic. "Sir, something's happening. Clients are pulling out. The investors, they're gone. They're saying they can't be connected to you anymore." "What nonsense is this?" Eze barked. "Get them back on the phone. Remind them who they're dealing with." Amara's voice trembled. "They won't talk to us. They said they heard about the warning, about the stranger. People think you're cursed." Eze slammed the phone down so hard it cracked. His heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't cursed. He was Eze Maduka. No one could touch him. But the day only got worse. His bank called next. His accounts were frozen. Something about an unexplained fraud investigation. His business partners refused to meet with him. His suppliers stopped returning his calls. The empire he built, brick by brick, began to collapse overnight, like it had never been there at all. By the end of the day, Zulenga no longer saw him as a king. He was a ghost. When Eze returned home that evening, his house felt different, colder, quieter. Even Nia's usual quiet shuffling was gone. He didn't care. His mind was too loud with fury and disbelief. But the house wasn't quiet for long. It started with small things. His keys, left on the table, appeared on the floor in the hallway. His wallet disappeared from his desk, only to be found hours later in the kitchen sink, soaking wet. He accused Nia, but she barely looked at him. The shadows were next. They clung to the corners of the rooms, darker than normal, unmoving even when the lights were on. They weren't shaped like furniture or curtains. They were wrong, twisted. He swore they moved when he wasn't looking. Then came the whispers. Late at night, when the world outside was silent, they filled the house. Low, hissing murmurs that seemed to come from the walls. Sometimes they sounded like his name, stretched and broken. Other times, they sounded like laughter. He barely slept. When he closed his eyes, he felt the weight of something watching him, something he couldn't see. His body ached from exhaustion. His head throbbed. But the moment he started to drift off, the whispers would surge, jarring him awake. Days passed. He stopped going to the office. What was left of it anyway? His once pristine suits hung loosely on his frame. He didn't eat. He didn't shave. His reflection stared back at him from the mirror, sunken and hollow-eyed. He looked like a man haunted, because he was. The house no longer felt like his. Doors creaked open on their own. The television flickered static late at night, even when it wasn't plugged in. Nia stopped sleeping in their room. He didn't ask where she went. He barely noticed anymore. One night, as he sat in the darkened living room, the whispers grew louder than ever. They weren't murmurs now. They were. His knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The shadows seemed to shift closer, curling toward him like smoke. He felt their weight, their coldness, pressing down on him. For the first time in his life, Eze Maduka knew what it felt like to be truly powerless. Zulenga moved on without him. The city thrived, and no one spoke his name. Nia watched from afar, no longer broken, only waiting. The ancestors were still watching, and Eze's fall wasn't over yet. Eze Maduka was no longer the man he used to be. Once, he was a king in Zulenga, untouchable, respected, feared. Now, he was a ghost walking among the living. His face, once proud and commanding, had hollowed into something unrecognizable. His clothes hung off his frail frame. His once smooth skin was rough and sallow, and his eyes carried the wild, desperate look of a man running from something he couldn't escape. His world had crumbled faster than he ever thought possible. His business, his wealth, his status, all gone. His employees vanished without a word. His business partners wouldn't take his calls. His bank accounts were locked, and his luxurious cars sat unused, gathering dust. People who used to greet him with smiles now crossed the street when they saw him. Vendors refused to sell him food, even when he threw money at them. Zulenga, the city he once ruled, rejected him like poison. But it wasn't just the outside world that turned against him. His home had become a prison. The mansion that once symbolized his success now felt alive and angry. The air inside was heavy, like it didn't want him there. Objects moved when he wasn't looking. Lights flickered and died. Whispers filled the rooms, surrounding him in a language he couldn't understand, but felt deep in his bones. Eze couldn't sleep. Every time he tried, the whispers grew louder, wrapping around his mind. They didn't stop when he woke up either. They followed him, day and night, a constant reminder that he was never alone. Shadows danced in the corners of his vision, always just out of reach. Sometimes, he caught glimpses of things that shouldn't be there, eyes watching him from the darkness, or figures standing at the end of the hallway, gone when he blinked. Desperation clawed at him. He was a man of action, a man who solved problems, so he searched for answers. He found priests, healers, and mystics, begging for help. Some turned him away, others listened, only to shake their heads and say the same thing. This is not a sickness that can be cured. One old woman looked at him with pity and said, "The ancestors have spoken. You cannot buy your way out of this." Eze refused to believe it. He tried everything, burning herbs, hanging charms, pouring salt along the walls. He even prayed to gods he didn't believe in. Nothing worked. The house remained hostile, and the whispers only grew crueler. He stopped leaving his home. His once flawless appearance fell apart. His beard grew wild, his skin slick with sweat. He barely ate. He barely moved. He felt like a trapped animal, pacing from room to room, hoping for silence that never came. One night, the whispers stopped. The house fell into a thick, suffocating silence. It wasn't peace. It was wrong. Eze sat in his darkened living room, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't move. He barely breathed. A sound broke the quiet. Footsteps. Slow, steady, coming from upstairs. His throat tightened. He knew he was alone. Nia was gone. His staff had fled long ago. There was no one else. The footsteps came closer. His hands shook. He didn't dare look, but something made him turn his head. A force beyond his control. At the top of the stairs, a figure stood, tall, cloaked in shadow. But Eze knew those eyes, piercing and unforgiving. Kofi Bahati, the man who warned him. Kofi didn't speak, but Eze heard his voice, deep and cold, inside his mind. "The ancestors are watching, Eze Maduka." Eze's breath hitched. He fell to his knees, his body trembling. His voice came out in a broken whisper. "Please, I'm sorry. I'll do anything. Just make it stop." Kofi's expression didn't change. His eyes glowed softly like distant stars. "Sorry won't undo what's been done. The ancestors demand balance." The shadows behind Kofi began to move, stretching and twisting like living smoke. They poured down the stairs, slithering toward Eze. His body seized with terror, but he couldn't run. His legs refused to work. The shadows reached him, cold and wet against his skin. They wrapped around his arms, his chest, his throat. His screams choked off, his lungs burning as the darkness swallowed him whole. The last thing he saw was Kofi's glowing eyes, watching without mercy. By morning, Eze Maduka was gone. When Nia returned to the house, the front door hung open. The air was light, almost peaceful. The suffocating heaviness was gone. The mansion was empty. On the floor, near the place where Eze had last stood, she found a single scrap of paper. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. There were only 4 words written on it, in handwriting that wasn't Eze's. "The ancestors are watching." The moon hung high over Zulenga, casting an icy glow over the streets. The city buzzed faintly in the distance. Laughter from taverns, music from street corners, the hum of life continuing as it always did. But for Eze Maduka, the world had grown quiet, too quiet. His feet dragged along the uneven roads, his once powerful stride reduced to a weak, staggering shuffle. His body felt hollow, his mind a swirling mess of fear and exhaustion. His clothes, once pristine and tailored to perfection, were now wrinkled and torn. His face, once admired and envied, was barely recognizable. Sunken eyes, dry, cracked lips, skin pulled tight over sharp bones. Every shadow felt alive. Every corner held a figure that wasn't really there. The whispers had returned, louder now. His name echoed from alleyways and rooftops, circling him like a taunt. His breath quickened, panic squeezing his chest. He turned his head, and there he was, Kofi Bahati, standing calmly at the end of the street, his eyes locked onto Eze's with an unsettling stillness. Eze's heart slammed against his ribs. He blinked hard, hoping the figure would vanish, but Kofi remained, watching. His legs moved on instinct, carrying him forward in a frantic, stumbling sprint. His lungs burned, his throat raw from the cold night air. He didn't know where he was running to. He only knew he had to get away. His mind screamed for help. He crashed into a fruit cart, sending oranges spilling onto the cobblestones. The vendor stared at him but said nothing. No one moved to help him up. "Please!" Eze's voice was barely a croak. "Somebody help me!" No one spoke. No one reached for him. He may as well have been invisible. He scrambled to his feet and ran again, the city blurring past him. His chest heaved with each breath, but the fear gave him strength he shouldn't have had. He turned a corner and froze. Kofi stood at the end of the street once more, still, quiet, unshaken. Tears stung Eze's eyes. His body trembled uncontrollably. He spun around and fled again, his mind racing faster than his legs. His feet slipped on the uneven ground, sending him crashing to his knees. His hands scraped against the rough street, blood smearing his fingertips. The whispers were louder now. They weren't just calling his name anymore. They were laughing. The sound wasn't human. It twisted through the night air like smoke, thick and suffocating. His ears rang. His head throbbed. He tried to push himself up, but his body wouldn't obey. His arms shook beneath him, too weak to hold his weight. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, growing closer. He didn't want to look. He didn't need to. He knew who it was. Terror filled his chest, burning and cold all at once. His breath hitched, his vision swimming. He felt the weight of something unseen pressing down on him, pinning him to the earth. His body trembled violently. The last thing his eyes caught was the moon, full and unforgiving, shining down on him like a silent judge. His lips parted to beg, but no sound came. When dawn broke over Zulenga, life stirred once more. The streets came alive with chatter, footsteps, and the smell of cooking fires. Children laughed as they chased each other. Merchants prepared for the day ahead. In the center of the street, Eze's lifeless body lay still. His eyes were open, locked in a frozen expression of terror no one could explain. His hands were curled tightly into his chest, his face twisted in a silent scream. A crowd gathered, murmuring quietly among themselves. They didn't know what to make of it. A man who once seemed untouchable, now reduced to this. But one thing made the crowd fall into an uneasy silence. Carved into the dirt beside him, clear as day, were 4 words. "The ancestors are watching." The news spread through Zulenga like wildfire. Eze was dead. People whispered in the streets, in the markets, and outside their homes. The official report claimed it was a heart attack, but no one believed that. The people of Zulenga knew better. They knew the truth. The spirits do not forget. The ancestors do not forgive. Some said they saw him the night before, running through the streets like a madman, screaming for help that never came. Others swore they saw Kofi Bahati, standing in the shadows, watching silently as fate delivered its final blow. No one doubted that justice had come for Eze. The man who once held power over everyone died alone, terrified and powerless. For Nia Maduka, the news brought a strange mix of emotions. She sat quietly in the small room she had found after leaving Eze. At first, she didn't feel relief or happiness. She just felt empty. The man who stole her dreams, her freedom, and her happiness was gone. The nightmare was over, but the scars he left, inside and out, were still there. She stared at the sunlight streaming through the window, warming her skin. For the first time in years, it felt like hope. She didn't have to hide anymore. She didn't have to live in fear. She was free, truly free. But freedom wasn't enough. Nia thought about all the women in Zulenga who still lived in fear. Women like her, trapped, beaten, silenced. Women who smiled in public while hiding their pain behind closed doors. She couldn't turn her back on them. Not now. She used what little money she had saved, along with help from the people of Zulenga, people who admired her strength and her courage, to open a shelter. It wasn't just a safe place. It was a sanctuary, a place where women could heal, find their voices again, and rebuild their lives. She named it House of Ancestors Justice. The name spread through Zulenga, carrying power with it. It wasn't just a shelter, it became a symbol, a reminder. Every man in Zulenga knew what had happened to Eze Maduka. They knew his cruelty. They knew how he died, and they knew why. No man in Zulenga dared to raise his hand against a woman again. Fear didn't keep them in line. Respect did. Respect for Nia, for the women who found strength in her shelter, and for the ancestors who watched over them all. Nia stood at the front of the shelter one morning, watching the sun rise over Zulenga. She felt stronger than ever before. The city looked different now, brighter, calmer, safer. She knew the ancestors were still watching, but now they were watching over her, over every woman who needed them, over a city that had finally learned the true meaning of justice. And this time, Nia smiled, not to hide her pain, but because she finally felt peace.